Hey, everybody, and welcome once again to the Fart Fetish Podcast. That podcast where we seek to find the answers to the what, where, how, and sometimes why of fart fetish, and try to give a nuanced picture of the people that have fetishes. I'm your host, Raj. Watch for new episodes of the podcast every first Friday of the month on fartfetishpodcast.com, as well as most major podcast platforms. You can also support me and the show by checking out the ad-supported erotic fart content on thefartcloset.com. And now I'd like to introduce Rick to the podcast. Rick is a medical professional, and he was featured in Vice's 2018 article, Meet the Men Who Have a Fart Fetish. Rick considers himself more of a longtime fan of farting, rather than a fart fetishist. And in this episode, we dive into some of Rick's farting experiences over the years, talk about incorporating farting into his sex life, and dive a bit into the potential appeal of farting for him on a physiological level. Plus, we talk about so much more in this insightful and thought-provoking episode. So let's get right into the Fart Fetish Podcast. At Rick's request, I have altered his voice for this interview. Thanks very much for being here, Rick. Why don't we start with a little bit about yourself and what this fetish looks like for you?
Okay, well, where can I start? So, I'm 62 years old, so I'm not young, and I guess I've been interested in this thing for a while now, since I was a kid. It, Let me just say at the outset, though, Raj, that I don't really consider it to be, for me, a fart fetish, in that, if anything, it's about farting, not farts. Like, if I walked into an elevator and there was a fart there, I wouldn't be particularly turned on by it, unless I could attribute that fart to a person or a body or something like that. So it's more the act of farting than actual farts that are of interest to me. And I also think that, so like, a disembodied fart is not really a turn on for me. And also, I'm not really sure if it's a fetish in the true sense of the word. I really consider it to be just, part of that rich mosaic of human sexuality, and just a variation of sexual expression. So I guess that's where it is. When I was a kid, I was a pretty nerdy, shy kid. The smart kid in the class, all that sort of stuff. And so farting was quite outrageous. And I was in the Boy Scouts, believe it or not, and I didn't particularly like being in the Boy Scouts. But one thing I did like, actually, was that there was a certain camaraderie around farting, and I could actually join in and be part of the group if I did that. So that was kind of fun, and I really enjoyed that time, or that aspect of that time anyway. And then sort of fast forward a bit till I was sort of in my late teens. I had other distractions, obviously, and I sort of got billeted on an exchange thing with a family in Paris, in France, and they weren't particularly around my parents' age. Like, the family, I think they were on short supply for billet families. So this was like a cool young couple in their early 30s, and they had kids that were sort of like 5 and 8 or something like that. So I was about 16 or 17. And so I did most of my socialising and hanging out with the parents rather than the children. And they were quite interesting, intelligent people. And much to my sort of titillation, they actually talked quite openly about farts and things. And they had some friends that came around for dinner and actually just farted at the dinner table, and amongst other political and intellectual conversation. And that was immensely exciting for me. And I remember, actually, that was the first time I really associated it with something sexual, in that I went to bed that night and I literally had a wet dream, just thinking about that. So yeah, and then things went from there, I guess.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. That's quite a like a colorful background you've relayed, and it's very interesting. Do you know, like like how or why you maybe had the start of this interest in farts, like where it like you noticed it, and maybe why that came about, if you had theories about it?
Well, yeah, I know. I think, yeah, okay. So I'll sort of go into my biomedical mode now, if you like.
Certainly.
So I think that the human body, or embryologically, we consist of arise from three primordial germ layers of cells, right? So there's the ectoderm, which is the skin that covers our bodies. There is the endoderm, which is more or less the lining of our gut and our digestive tract or alimentary tract. And then between that is the mesoderm, which is kind of muscle and bone and stuff like that. And our organism is really like just one big alimentary tract when you think about it. And at the two ends of that, mainly the face and mouth and the bottom, it's a convergence of those three sort of cell layers. And when you think about it, that's kind of where our erogenous zones are, in face and mouth and throat, and particularly that lovely arc of flesh called the perineum, which is, in the female, it's sort of like the groin, clitoris, vagina, inside the uterus and so on, and then going back to the anus and the skin around the anus. In the male, obviously, there's the penis and scrotum and testes, and there's also the prostate inside the rectum. So I think that all our sort of sexual focus is really on those convergence areas of our body, and they're all richly innervated with wonderful nerve endings and exquisite sensations and so on. And so I think as individuals, we probably tend to have differential representation in our brain for each of those parts of those erogenous zones. So I think some people maybe are more centered on genitalia, like the penis, the vagina, the clitoris, and so on. And then the rest of us are probably focused on the anus and the rectum and so on. And that also, follows to what goes in and comes out of that body part. So, I guess that that's where maybe proctophilia comes in. So I really see that as just part of erotic pleasuring, really, and both in terms of evacuating gas, because that's a very pleasurable sensation. Emptying a hollow viscus, and also just the tickling sensation sometimes, is enjoyable, and then also enjoying that expression of other people as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I have to admit, your expertise on the body is far beyond my own. So, but I do want to highlight that, as well, as I think there is I want to give listeners and other fetishists the conception that fetishists really run the spectrum of the intellectual and academic space, and you're really the first guest who's I think really I think pushed that to the high end of the intellectual and academic spectrum. That's not to diminish anyone's intelligence or anything at all. I'm not even I'm not even that high on the intelligence spectrum. I just really appreciate your I don't know. It's hard to even put into words, like I say, because it's not something I have a strong vocabulary for in the medical field. But I do appreciate you. Early on to say I appreciate you wanting to come on and talk about this, and talk in even your expertise level as well.
It's really just my way of making sense of my world, really. So everyone has their own way of doing that, and that's my language. So
That's a great perspective, because I definitely feel that about media and film and things like that. So I appreciate that view, that perspective you have on it, because I agree. I agree with that view. Um, so I get a sense, like, from the way you're talking, but please enlighten further on, like, what kind of aspects or themes do you enjoy around this? I guess kink would be fair, or maybe not. This enjoyment you have around farts. Maybe it's not even right to say aspects and themes, as if like it's going to a video site and looking for a video. Like, how would you describe? How would you expand on the way you, I guess, enjoy farting, the act of the whatever else goes with it, I guess, for you?
Yeah, okay. So I guess yeah, like with most things, there's sort of two aspects. There's the giving and the receiving. Um, in terms of the giving, I, uh, I like the idea that despite of what you said about me with my intellectual blah blah blah, uh, I'm also on the same level as everyone. Everyone farts, and I like to be able to express that aspect of myself. It's an enjoyable bodily function, and it's lovely to be sufficiently based to share that with other people. And I think it's quite transgressive. So in some ways, whilst your podcasts are wonderful for, in some ways, normalising this, I always want to think it's going to be something that's a little bit outrageous. It's not as if it's sick or perverted, but it is a little bit naughty, and that's what I like about it, and that's what I like, doing that sort of shock value. When I think about some of the let's call them relationships I've had with people, with men particularly who fart, the most enjoyable ones are those that there seems to be this great big discordance between their persona, their intellectual prowess, whatever you want to call it, and the fact that they actually fart. That's really, I find that a great turn on, that contrast thing. That's what I enjoy about it. So, like I said, it's not about the fart; it's about the farter and the farting. So that's kind of what does it for me. In terms of being a receiver of farting, I think I probably enjoy, or I have enjoyed all aspects of it. The in terms of all of our five senses. I can go into detail about that if you want, but and also maybe if you call a sixth sense, fantasizing about it. So that's where the virtual world, online content comes in, and that's something that's certainly burgeoned over the last sort of 20 years or so. But before that, it was basically real-time stuff, face-to-face, as it were. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. I would love actually to hear about your, I guess it would be your perspective on I guess, enjoying it on all five senses, or what would you be your
Yeah.
expansion on that?
Okay. I'll go ahead. So, uh, okay, I'll start with the simple stuff. So, basically, the sound is really enjoyable of a nice fruity fart. Hearing it come out, and so on. If that's my own or someone else's, that's just really very arousing. And there's so much variation in terms of the sound. Um, you know, um, Nothing like a great big loud fart, a fruity, tingling sound. Even like sort of short bursts, all that sort of thing. Very very erotic, I think. What's also really arousing, I think, is seeing someone fart, seeing them purse their lips to strain, maybe the sort of pose they adopt. If they're sitting down, they lean to one side and lift their legs slightly, or when they stand, if they, pull their butt cheek apart a little bit to ease out the gas, that's all very, very arousing. Smell, obviously. Some smells can be offensive, but in a sort of like an enjoyable way. I've certainly, in some of the more intense experiences, I've enjoyed being at ground zero, as it were, right as it comes out, and that is really, really intense. I've known a couple of great experiences where me and another guy have, spent half a day basically sharing each other's gas and inhaling it and enjoying it, and to the point where I almost think I started to wheeze a little bit. I'm not sure how healthy that is, but that was a really intense experience that you can share with someone else. It's really deep intimacy. And on the same person also, I actually tasted the farts as well, which was a very new sensation for me.
Amazing. That is a really amazing. I appreciate your delving into that very cerebral look at each of the senses. I really appreciate. Do you happen to do any kind of like erotic writing or anything in that space? Just because it seems like the way you describe some of the details, it seems like you definitely maybe think in that terms, but maybe it's just for fantasy.
Maybe I should. I don't know. No, I haven't. No, maybe I should.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate, like you talked about the pursed lips and things. I appreciated the detail because I do feel like I enjoy all those small little aspects of, seeing the humanity, seeing and I really appreciated too what you say about the dichotomy. I think, though I've never really said that or really thought that, I think there's something about the dichotomy of you mentioned the between the intelligence and farting. I think there's also, for some, the femininity and farting. I know one of the guests spoke on that, and I think that's maybe something that is appealing to me in some ways as well. That kind of what do you call it? Changed expectation, or the expectation not met, as it were.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's there's all that sort of like masculine bluster and all that sort of thing around it, which is kind of fun. But in the end, in my experience, a lot of the arousal comes from people who have a certain coyness around it. I had a long-term relationship with a guy of Middle Eastern origin, and that Middle Eastern cuisine is wonderful in lots of ways, and he was almost a little bit embarrassed about his gas, but because of the amount of gas that he produced, it was unavoidable. But there was always a slight embarrassment about it, which I found quite lovely. So yeah, I think that's kind of sweet. I also like the brazenness of it sometimes, but sometimes when people unavoidably do it, I like it when I express myself in certain situations. I don't do it routinely. I can't do that in my profession. It would be a problem with credibility and too much of a distraction in certain moments, but generally, I always excuse myself when I fart, because I think that is kind of it's kind of polite, but it also acknowledges the fact that I farted, right? So I'm going to excuse myself. So it's drawing attention to the fact that you farted.
Interesting.
But you're still being polite. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, that is an interesting perspective. I never thought about that. I mean, it's true. It's like you are being polite, but at the same time, highlighting it in a way that maybe people would try to be like, no, that didn't happen, in a way, or try to pretend and see if other people agree. And society, hey, did that not happen?
I've seen that so much where people, just if you do it and don't acknowledge it, people just politely, pretend it didn't happen. But if you actually say, "Oh, excuse me," and then maybe even elaborate about what you had for lunch or something, it's unavoidable. People have got to actually acknowledge it. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. I agree. And you make a good point too about I'm kind of parsing it out to like the personality element of the farter and that kind of being an almost more important element in some ways. I feel that way about the content, the domination things, the sessions I would have or what have you. Similarly, is like it's more about the um, living in that world, that personality, that aura is occurring more so sometimes for myself than the farting itself. It's like for me, it's that domination aura, but I understand the aura of like being embarrassed, being more blatant about it, more boisterous about it. I think it's another thing interesting that you take note of, not of the you did actually of the farts themselves in each of the scent aspects, but also to the personality of the person. What's happening in the moment is almost like part of the experience for you.
For sure, for sure.
I love that. I love that. Um, do you feel like there's any other like kinks for you in around this area that you enjoy, or is like this the one for you, or is there other things that you like to incorporate?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I sort of uh, one of my former and I hope future sort of fart buddies. I once asked him. I said, "Oh, so what do you do? What else do you do for sex?" And he just looked at me quizzically and just said, "Well, this is sex." So I thought, no, that's pretty valid. But yeah, so in terms of me, I guess I enjoy all other aspects of sexuality. I'm a gay man, so it's the same sex thing for me. So standard sort of receptive anal intercourse. In terms of variations on that, I think I'm one of those people, like I said before, that's sort of anally focused. So rimming is fantastic. It wouldn't be a proper interaction unless you kind of rimmed each other. That's my main thing. I think I have sort of enjoyed spanking in the past. I'm probably a little bit old to get spanked now, but I'm not really into pain as such. But just the act of kind of spanking is kind of arousing, and probably these days I just look at videos of it really, with much younger butts than mine being spanked.
Nice. What you talked a bit about, I think, the means in which you enjoy this fetish in your day-to-day life or occasional life. I don't know exactly, but like, has it always been the same through your life, through your time living with this fetish?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I mean, I think once again, it's sort of not. Um, it's not as if one is going to be having intense experiences like I've described before on a regular basis. This could be happening like maybe once or twice a year, but other than that, I mean, we kind of all fart. Who knows how many times a day, and so whenever the opportunity arises to express that or witness it, that's always a good day. So I have a life partner, of some 25 years or so, who doesn't share that intensity maybe as I do, and so I do have sort of outside experiences and things, but on a day-to-day basis with him, we can fart around each other and one of the nice things is sleeping with someone and kind of spooning and farting on each other throughout the night. So that's kind of good, and it's kind of normal, and it's part of the intimacy people share.
That's great. I love that. I love that experience, that how you explain it. It's very. I love the intimacy of it. I think is what I really appreciate, because I don't feel like that's an aspect that's talked about as much. I think we've explored it in, like, I think a more camaraderie side of intimacy, which I believe is very much a similar an aspect, another way to say intimacy, another way to experience it. But yeah, I really appreciate the way you've laid that out, especially with your partner. That's really cool. I really I like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think also the when I talk about some more intense experiences and so on, they're actually devoid of orgasms. I don't want to have an orgasm in that sort of situation, because really, when there's an orgasm, it's all over, and you want it to keep going. And in fact, that sort of farting and is an orgasm in itself, I reckon. And just the intensity of that intimacy, that's like one big prolonged orgasm. So you don't need to actually have some sort of genital orgasm in those situations. In fact, I don't want to.
Yes, that makes a whole lot of sense. I can see the same appeal for, like, a creative expression, like writing or whatever, what have you. I mean, that's not even to say that what you're talking about is not a creative expression as well. It is. But yes, I do see the appeal of, like, wanting to withstand, withhold, whatever, maintain the sexual energy, because truly it is all over. And I do agree too. I don't think anyone else has said it, but I do agree with the farting really being associated with a orgasm. I mean, for me, I definitely have that mentality in my fantasy, as in, the farting is kind of the release, the relief, for whether, both in the fantasy and for the the dreamer, as it were. So I find that very interesting that you also put that connection on it as well.
Yeah, I remember when I was a student, one of my professors sort of made this sort of like observational quote in one of the lectures, saying that some of the greatest pleasures known to mankind arise from the filling and emptying of hollow viscera. So I think we're in that spectrum, really.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and it's if I get a sense, and we've talked both in this interview and in emails, that I get a sense that you're the guest with the longest timeline within the fetish scene, as it were. Can you talk about a little bit about, like, how you've seen maybe things change, things maybe before social media, even before the internet, perhaps? I don't know exactly where you fall, but yeah, I'm intrigued to hear that change, because we've heard a little bit about the history on past episodes, but I don't think we've delved nearly as far back as you may go.
You're talking about prehistory, I think, Raj, aren't you?
I suppose so. I suppose. I mean, I wouldn't put it that way, but I mean, I guess it's fart fetish prehistory.
No, it is. Yeah. Like before the internet and before you were probably born, there were these sort of like magazines, classified ads, and where I lived, I think they were called Outreach and Campaign, I think they were called, and most of them were for fairly vanilla type situations, and you had like an address, or no, you had an ID number or something on the ad, and then you contacted the magazine, and they put you in touch with that ID number, and then you got a little letter or something in the mail, like actual letter from a person about a hookup. So it could take ages to get responses, if at all. And so, but in those days, I don't think the so-called fetish actually even had a name. And what you found yourself going down the route of scat, which is a totally different trip. And sometimes in the hope that would lead to a fart fetish, whereas in fact a lot of the people that were into scat, farting was just like the foreplay aspect of that rather than the end in itself. So it was kind of difficult, really. And so I think for those of us with that sort of interest, I think you just had to basically incorporate it into your normal interactions with someone. So, the phenomenon of, farting on the first date was probably something that that I was usually keen to do, because that would basically declare you and allow the other person to declare themselves as well. And, it was sort of good if maybe if the other guy wasn't really into that as such, if he was willing to kind of accept and tolerate that aspect of you, that was probably good. And so I guess I always tried to do that. Then going back, it's interesting actually. I sort of, so I speak French, and I had another experience in France some years later than what, like when I was a kid, I was there on this exchange thing, and then 20-something years later, I was working there for a period of time, and got together with this French guy, and he would sort of fart sometimes around me, and then when I did it around him, he said, "Do you like farting?" And that was the first time I actually heard that actually verbalised, that it was something that, like you enjoy that, on a deeper level. And so that kind of validated everything for me. We had a great time. And that sort of ended. I came back to where I live, and by this time, the internet was expanding at an exponential rate, and that's when we had those Yahoo groups and various things, and I almost forget the name of them, but there was male ass rippers, and I think Fart Fans was another one that wasn't exclusively gay, I don't think, but people could just chat and talk about their interest, and so I actually met some good friends from that, and one or two of them I actually met with. I guess the problem was that they're usually sort of 2 continents removed, and so real-time stuff is very difficult. And I think now maybe that's a bit different. There's so many more networks and things that we can join. Still, there's a lot of false starts and things, but I think in the end, a lot of the online content is really good and very validating. I'm still old-fashioned in the sense that I'd rather actually do it in person. So I'm ever on the lookout for those opportunities, I guess.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Was this because we talked about you'd mentioned to me you'd realized farting was an overtly sexual act quite some years ago. Was this around that time? And do you have more to say about that? Because I presume it's about the, as you said, farting and orgasm kind of associated. But do you have more to expand on that? And maybe I'm incorrect in assuming that.
I couldn't really imagine an enjoyable sexual encounter without some sort of farting, I don't think, to be honest. I think, because once again, that whole part of our body is kind of expressing itself and exploding at that time, and you're kind of letting it all hang out, really. So yeah, and I think like in the early days when I was realising my sexuality as a whole, I was probably initially a little bit reticent to incorporate farting into that, and then one day I actually thought, no, I actually should incorporate this. So I did this a couple of times around that time, where I just sort of like announced to the other guy, I said, oh, excuse me, do you mind if I fart? And regardless of what the response was, I would anyway. So and then I realised actually this is part of the fantastic sexual encounter. So I've always ever since tried to incorporate that.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, and then with this, because I feel like you kind of touched on it here, with this overt sexuality and farting, how do you draw like a professional line between your medical work and the clear interest in farting?
Yeah, good point. And I know I've had one or two friends who say, yeah, how can you possibly do that? I could never do that. I guess we're kind of just brought up like that anyway, as part of our training and education. It's almost like you're two different people in that respect. And I actually do deal with that part of the body a lot, in fact, predominantly in my professional life. And so, yeah, I'm very, very clear about that. You kind of intellectualize or make it this sort of clinical encounter. And I guess I have scripts and things that are quite bland about explaining to people and explaining what I'm going to do to them in terms of examining them or doing procedures and things, and so you kind of just go into this automatic pilot, if you like, and like I said before, I think it's not just about an anus or a disembodied anus or flatulence or something. It's about the person as well. So it's pretty hard to get aroused on someone that you don't really have some sort of liking for, or knowledge of, or familiarity with. So, so I think, it's not, it's a purely professional encounter. Having said that, there are sometimes situations where you think, I could like to get to know this person, but it doesn't move on. So. I wouldn't dare risk, a professional relationship or compromise anyone's care as a result of that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, I don't think anyone would. I don't think anyone should believe it. I think there's maybe a conception that the liking of farts, I think, is whether it be fetish or kink or what have you. I think to make highlight of liking it, I think gives people a notion that it's like insatiable or like anything will do. And maybe there are people like that. I'm not sure, but I'm sure there's people not completely non-discerning, but like, I think the point is it is really about, the scene, the situation, the what is going on. I think for most people who seem to enjoy this fetish, I believe I could be mistaken in that, but I definitely relate to it. I definitely feel that in my own enjoyment of this as a fetish for myself. So I mean, that makes perfect sense to me that it's a completely different situation than any kind of bedroom play or even just like, fooling around with people or what have you. It's a professional work environment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Would you say, would you say like you're pretty public or private about this fetish? Like, especially if sexuality is in the conversation, but even in a general sense, perhaps as well.
Well, no, probably not. Like a lot of people that you've been talking to, I it's more of an intimate thing, and I wouldn't sort of like put out a full page advertisement about it, particularly in my professional life, because it leads you open to all sorts of uh, credibility crises, I guess, like in terms of people not taking you seriously. So I'd rather keep it private, but then again, with people that I'm being intimate with, yes, I would definitely divulge it. Having said that, there are also some instances where like I'll fart in public and stuff like that, in certain situations. Not so much in my work situation, once again, for the credibility sort of side of things, but where I like to be able to express myself when the opportunity arises, just to declare that I think it's an enjoyable bodily function that maybe we should all express more.
Yeah, I like that. I like that thought. Um, I really, it makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like, and maybe this is my misconception, do you feel like it's at odds with um, the desire to maintain the sort of naughtiness, as you said, about farting in general, or do you feel like they are like compatible in terms of like, because it sounds like you're in a way trying to normalize or giving an idea of normalization, but I know you also enjoy the kind of you didn't say taboo, but sort of the transgressive idea behind it.
Yeah, I guess I'm still trying to sort that out myself. Actually, that yeah, it's nice to be kind of naughty. I wouldn't, and like I guess I wouldn't like to see a world where everyone just farted whenever they felt like it and didn't say anything about it. So yeah, it's a fine line. It's a bit of a tightrope, really. So yeah, I'm still working that one out. But yeah, no, I'd rather sort of err on the side of being a bit naughty, actually.
For sure, for sure.
But still, in some way, normalizing that naughtiness, if you like.
Yeah,
So it's not the sort of thing you do all the time, but it'd be something that you kind of do on special occasions. I don't know.
well, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think it really makes sense. I think. Um, I don't know how. I almost feel like normalization won't necessarily change the naughtiness of it, in some ways. Because and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about how that feeling would go about. But I don't know. It almost still feels like it shouldn't be done. I guess if we lived in a world where every movie and every TV show then depicted our kinks or our interests in that way, then we might have a weird normalization thing where things stop being a certain naughtiness. Because I think despite the show and wanting to be able to at least talk about it more, I don't know if it changes. I'm curious if it changes the naughtiness in any capacity. It's almost like if there's any way to field test the normalcy around a group of people and then see how that changes the feelings for a group. It would be intriguing for sure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Just sort of going back to what you were talking about before about the history of all this. Uh, Representations of farting in popular culture and popular media has been very interesting, and I think the there was the wonderful baked beans scene from Blazing Saddles back in the 70s of the wonderful Mel Brooks. That I don't know if you remember that, like it was before you were born probably, but that was sort of like, that was very arousing for me, as a young teenager. And it's the sort of thing you'd look at over and over again if you could, and on the French side, there was a film in the early 70s called La Grande Bouffe, which was about four middle-aged men literally eating themselves to death in this sort of, gourmet sort of situation. And one of them was beset by, really terminal flatulence. And that was one of the first sort of representations of farting I saw in sort of mainstream, a little bit art house sort of cinema. And once again, that led to a whole lot of, masturbatory fantasies on my part. So I think, and increasingly now, we see in a lot of the material that's coming out on the streaming services and cinema and so on, people farting, but it's still naughty. It's not as if it's like a normal thing. It's always sort of like, but it's kind of good to see that. I'm so glad, there used to be censorship around that, I think, in the United States, even belching was a total taboo thing. And now we're seeing, farting as well. And I think that's fantastic. And I think, especially seeing, people that are fairly well-known, reputable actors, farting, even if it's not really their farts, it could just be some sort of sound effect, but whatever, good on them, fly the flag.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I think, that representation, we've talked about it on this show a couple of times with different guests, but yeah, the representation, I think, is more important than people maybe realize in the moment. I think there's, especially if it's cartoons, people are like, oh, don't do that in cartoons or whatever. But I think, as long as it's not overtly sexual or whatever, and I think it's good to see ourselves mirrored in media, and feel like, someone else is like us, even if it's a fictional cartoon, because I think that leads us to hopefully discover more people that are like us, maybe first online, and then, ideally, if that continues to be the person's interest, to meet them in person.
Well, yeah, that's right. And thank you, South Park, back in the early 2000s, Terrence and Phillip, I mean, how fabulous, and that was a cartoon representation, but in the end, it's sort of like, it had this whole, class of fifth graders who basically were riveted by this particular TV show about two brothers that were farting. How validating was that?
Absolutely.
But then, we see a lot of actual real people, or represented doing it too now, in television and cinema. So that's kind of fun too. But it's always framed in that sort of like naughty aspect as well.
It's true. And there's people who stream now video games for long times, hours a day. They're often doing it probably by accident, and many of them probably not wanting to be sexualized. So that should be avoided. But I know it's happened. There's compilation videos of this type of thing. People who enjoy that sort of thing of just I think it's the same thing, enjoying just more the aura of someone being in that moment and farting, rather than like lusting after the fart specifically itself. Or maybe not. Maybe some people would say it differently, but I think there's a lot to it. I think that's, because I'm not a personally, aroused or interested in like farts in casual settings. I like more dominating settings, but I can definitely see the interest in why people would, kind of the breaking of taboos, the normalcy of it. I think there's many different reasons why people could enjoy that.
Yep, it's a whole spectrum. Yeah,
Absolutely. And interestingly, to speak more on your history in this community, in this fetish in general, maybe even a grander scale than that, is you were actually featured in the Vice article that was titled "Meet the Men Who Have a Fart Fetish."
that's right.
As Rick. So how did that opportunity come about for you, and what made you want to participate in that?
I really can't remember. It was about 10 years ago, wasn't it? I think maybe it was through one of the people I used to talk to online that mentioned this, or I might have even seen. I think it was these guys at the University of Nottingham, somewhere in the UK, where I might have even seen some advertisement on one of the old groups, that they were doing some research in that area. So I contacted this guy that was the research assistant, and he set up this sort of interview with me, and it wasn't like we're talking now. It was actually like I forget the term that they use, but it was like a written interview. So he'd basically fire off a set of questions. I'd respond to them, via email, and then he'd come back with secondary questions, and it kind of went from there. So it was something that actually helped me a lot to articulate this interest of mine, and put it into words and maybe intellectualise it. So, you were saying before that, how I express myself about all this, and I guess that sort of set me up really to do that. The actual article itself was, a distillation of what I'd said, and obviously what the other guys had said as well. And it sort of, in some ways, it probably trivialised a little bit. It was more of like a media sort of piece rather than a truly intellectual article. And I never actually saw if they actually published that in some sort of peer-reviewed journal, scientific journal. But whatever. I mean, it's out there, and it's kind of nice that it is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely agree. It's definitely linked on proctophilia.org or fartfetish.info. Either one take you to the same place. And yeah, I think, for what it is, I think it is, it's a good first step for people who are, finding out maybe information. But obviously, articles like that were also why I started the website in general, and then subsequently the podcast was to try to get better information out there that was available. Obviously, the one case study is okay. I'm curious if I feel like Dr. Griffiths is out of Nottingham, but I might be incorrect on that. I have to go back and check. So I wonder if it was in relation to the study he was doing. But I think that was years earlier anyways, if I'm not mistaken, from the Vice article.
Yeah, with the same people. I think it was the same team, and I think the person I was dealing with was one of his, associates, I think. But and I think, like what you're doing now is next level. It's really taking it to the next level, and it's really creating a community, and I think that's kind of what the whole aim of all this should be, is to create this community, so that we can all feel some sort of bonding in that respect. And it's not just about sort of like meeting people for hookups and things, but just knowing that you're not alone in all this, and we can express it and articulate it.
I agree. I very much agree with that feeling. Did you at least feel like Vice or whoever was conducting the interview was at least respectful or what have you? Because you never know about that. Well, that's good.
Yeah, no, very much. I mean, it was it was all sort of like framed as a university sort of research thing, So I think, and there was nothing salacious or anything about it really. It was it just gave you free space to talk about it. And I wouldn't even dare to assume that those people were into that sort of thing themselves anyway. And I guess that is part of the thing too, that, like I don't really consider this to be some sort of paraphilia, I think in that, like what I was saying before, it's really just part of one of our erogenous sort of zones that we deal with. So it's not as if we're fetishizing, some sort of clothing or, inanimate thing. It's about sort of animal sexuality. So, and I think that's how they were kind of framing it, as some sort of paraphilia. And maybe I think part of the objective of what you're doing is to maybe take it out of that space and bring it more into the mainstream. But, let's not quite, let's hope,
I hear you too. And it's interesting. Yeah. I don't know if uh, I ever thought about it in those terms, but I think you're right. I definitely am into the kind of normalization aspect, if only normalization in terms of like getting people to see that fart fetishists are not they're not an image of some kind of creepster or weirdo or what have you, that I think people maybe come to. And maybe I'm incorrect. Maybe I have a misconception on people. Maybe they are more accepting. And I think that actually has been um that's been my experience, actually, in telling people, like we're talking about the show, and then if they express interest in like what kind of show, talking a little bit more about it. I've never really experienced much people having an outward like disgust or anything to that effect. Maybe that just speaks to the people I run into, or maybe it speaks to people being a little more accepting than we may fear at first blush, in terms of this kink, of this enjoyment. As weird as it may be, as taboo as it may be, I think the people who, I guess, as it were, like see the human in us, at whatever the aspect is, I think those are the people who can understand, can at least grasp. Like maybe they can't do it for us, maybe they can't like fully like I don't get this, but I respect you or what have you. I think those are the people that can be talked about in these fetish terms at the very least. And
Yeah,
shared.
I think it's an age-old thing. It's not as if it's something new. And I think what all this is doing is actually helping people to actually realise that. I think if you're into someone, you're going to be into their farts as well. It's a given fact, and I'm sure that's been since time immemorial. And now we can finally sort of like actually say it. So yeah, it's interesting. I was sort of reading the other day, or maybe it was on Instagram. Someone was sort of saying that stop accusing a lot of LGBTIQA advocates of creating a whole generation of trans kids. There's this epidemic of trans kids. In the 1950s, when they stopped forcing kids to write with their right hand, that led to a so-called explosion of left-handed kids. No, that wasn't the case. They were always there. We could finally just actually validate them. So it may be the same for proctophilia, and lots of other things too, is that it's always been there. We just haven't been articulating it, and we've been a little bit too shy to talk about it.
That's certainly been the some of my thinking, in terms of, and maybe not my unique thinking, but in compiling the quotes from historical figures. You have the James Joyce, which I think more people are familiar with, the Stephen King experience with his babysitter, Benjamin Franklin writing about the affinity of farts to the Naval Academy, and the kind of I think the health aspects, but also it was clearly written with an affinity for it. This is all on the website, fartfetish.info. But yeah, I think there is something to be said that this has maybe been a long historical enjoyment, a long historical aspect of human nature, human existence, that people have appreciated in maybe a more a highlighted way compared to others, whether it be a fetishization or just a strong affinity for it. I think that's the thing. It may be more go further back than the exploration currently has allowed it, or has, people have awakened to it being something more than just like, this person's a little quirky. I think similar to ways I think people thought about other sexuality or alternative sexuality, as it were, where it starts as something like, that's a little weird, and then people like, oh, there's more people than this than I thought. This is epidemic. This is a problem. Where's this coming from? Why are people becoming this? And then it's like, I see. This has just been something part of human nature all along.
Exactly. I'm just thinking as you speak about a book I read last year, and forgive me, I think the author's name is Douglas Stewart. He's a sort of Scottish writer, and the book's called Young Mungo, and it's about a young boy growing up in the housing estates of Glasgow, maybe in the 80s or 90s, I think, and he has a relationship with a young man, and there is a passage in it where they are locked in this embrace, and the other boy, does this long, loud fart while he's still holding this guy tight, and it was just like that. It wasn't fetishizing it, but it was actually an extension of the intimacy, and I think that was just such a wonderful passage. I just love that. I wish I should have brought it so I could read the whole thing, but it's out there somewhere, everyone. So I'd recommend that book just for its normalization of that as part of intimacy. Yeah,
that sounds great. Yeah, that sounds like a very interesting read. So that I'm going to check it out for sure as well. Do you speculate in your experience, your thoughts, your opinion? Do you feel like the affinity for farting, the whether it be again fetish or just enjoyment, is like genetic, and then there's a triggering moment in our lives in which we're kind of awakened to that enjoyment?
is it genetic? Is this sort of proclivity some sort of genetic phenomenon? I'm not really sure. I think it may be, but I think it was this aspect of sexuality is just part of a continuum, and so and I often wonder whether those parts of our perineum, the genitals, the anus, and all that sort of stuff, they must all have a direct line to bits of our brain at some stage, and representation in our brain, in our cortex, and maybe that representation varies in its proportion amongst individuals. Whether that's genetic, I don't know. It may be. Does it really matter? Probably not. There's the whole thing about sexual orientation itself as being genetic, and yes, it probably is. And if that means that we can validate ourselves by saying, "Look, we can't help it; it's genetic," that's fine, and I totally support that. In terms of justification, in a beautiful, ideal world, we shouldn't have to use genetics to justify, our various preferences and proclivities. We should be free to be able to express ourselves, provided we're not harming other people. So it's sort of it's a moot point.
Yeah, no, that's a very beautiful idea. I really like. I think you're very right about that. It's like we shouldn't have to use the idea of whether something is genetic or not, whether it is or not, even to justify things that aren't harming people, aren't harming ourselves. I think there's no reason to, usually when you're justifying things, it's not a good situation you're in. Anyways, I mean, I can't speak for every situation, but I think when we have to justify our existences, something is going wrong in the situation we are justifying ourselves, or the person. That's what I'm trying to dance around. It's like we're justifying ourselves perhaps to someone that maybe doesn't perhaps respect us in the way that they should, doesn't see us or support the real person that we are, maybe an idea that they have of us instead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very supportive of the idea that sexual orientation, for example, or gender dysphoria, it may be a genetic thing, and I think that is certainly very important in justifying banning conversion therapies and all sorts of things like that. So I think that's really, really vital. Ideally, though, I'd like to see a world where, people are accepted for who they are, and that could be a matter of personal choice, But we don't live in that sort of world yet, so I think,
No, absolutely.
We just have to deal with it.
Unfortunately, yeah, I agree. There is, not even just on this, but yeah, I recognize a lot of, there's just a lot of unfortunate aspects to I think, being people in society. I think they're not necessarily human aspects, which I kind of separate as kind of beautiful and natural, and I'm sure there's ugly ones as well, but like that's kind of like the more natural world is our human aspects, and the aspects in which we're people in society. That's where things start to get overly complicated. People maybe say things one way and then their actions react in a different way. All these contradictions that we live in as people of the world, and needing to, whether it be like, oh, I have to get over on people because I need to make my rent, or whatever the situation is, people justify or find ways to, they need to, we all need to exist in this very kind of painful, difficult world. So I think people sometimes maybe want to be idealists or wish they could, but don't have the perspective or the knowledge or the experience to do so.
For sure, yeah.
You mentioned in your messages to me that you have two sons, and the eldest of which had declared to you that he quote unquote loves farts. Do you have speculation for the maybe origins of how that interest came about for him, and what might have triggered it? if you could speculate,
yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. So look. Yeah. Okay. So I'm a very, very late biological dad. So the eldest we're talking about is like not even 5 years old, and I don't live with these kids. They live with their mums, but he did declare this to me on a video recently, and I was a little bit taken aback, amusedly, and I don't know where that came from. It's not something that that I've really had any input about. I'll be interested to see how that evolves over time. And I suspect a lot of kids, and maybe little boys particularly, would sort of probably say that, but whether they grow out of it or not, I don't know. So yeah, I'm watching the space with great interest, shall we say? And I suppose also I'm still wrestling with the idea of becoming, like a regular farting dad as well. I haven't addressed that yet. Maybe I will over the holiday period. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Interesting. What could you expand on what you mean by that? A regular farting dad?
Well, so yeah, it's sort of like because I do see it as something sexual. It'd be I guess a non-sexualized expression of that, if I'm doing it with the kids, it's just part of a family bonding activity. Whereas, normally up until now, it's always been something that's a bit sexualized for me. So, like I would sort of like be a little bit, I said before that, in some of these farting experiences, I don't seek to have an orgasm, but a memory of such an encounter probably, has fueled many a masturbatory fantasy subsequently. And so I would kind of be a little bit scared to think about, sharing farting experiences with the kids, and then fantasizing about it subsequently. I suspect I wouldn't, but yeah, I don't know. I'm still wrestling with that idea.
Absolutely. No, it is something to think about for sure. It is something to.
Does that sound creepy? I don't know. Yeah, it's not. But it's yeah, it's interesting. But a lot of the proctophilia that people that talk about and are talking about more now often arises in family situations as well. So and I think that we've already decided that it's not something that's sort of sick or terrible. So if family-based farts eventually lead to some sort of manifestation in adult life as sexualized farting, well, so be it.
Yeah, it's an interesting area just because there's a whole. I don't know. It's. I mean, I personally am a big fan of mother domination. So there's a whole area of like, what's that about? Why, is that acceptable? What have you? But I don't think, I think we all have our interests and what have you. It's, I think, how we figure that out, how we square those ideas, how we maintain whatever our correct level of appropriateness is. I think is our that's each of us have to it's really, I think the at the end of the day it's really about what is causing harm. As long as things are not causing harm to self or others, I don't think it's kind of like our thoughts. We're not in full control of everything we think. We may have thoughts we don't like. We thoughts we never would vocalize because we know they would hurt people. We know they're socially unacceptable, what have you, whatever the moral code we have. I think it's our actions that I think determine who we are, and the recognition of the awareness of who we are. Because I think I talk about self-acceptance a lot on this show, and I think self-acceptance is it's not just taking the good and throwing away the bad. It's we all have good and bad within us. It's not, no one is a completely moral pillar of anything, I would say. And I think it's just accepting that and taking control of it and being aware of it. Because I think if that the issues arise when we're not aware of it, when we're not aware of what's happening inside our mind, which is why I really enjoy introspection and spending maybe too much time thinking about the self and the interactions, the thinking about other people as well, but trying to especially keep myself in check. So I think that's all of our work in life. I think that's how we continue to self-improve, starting and how we share ourselves with others as well, is practicing that self-acceptance of all of us, the good and the bad.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. I think it's wonderful to acknowledge that we are not all, any of us actually, pillars of moral virtue, that we all have that dichotomy within ourselves.
Absolutely. I think it's easily forgotten, or maybe it's I don't want to diagnose people, but I think many people try to push it down. They try to suppress the bad within them or the feelings within them, and that manifests itself then or comes out in terms of moralizing other people or trying to correct other people's behavior in a way that is not self-aware to their own behavior, or is self-aware but is projected outward of like, why are you doing this? It's almost like yelling at other people in a way they are not yelling at themselves, or avoiding the yelling at themselves they need to or should be doing.
Yes.
So, yeah, absolutely. Rick, I have to say, I'm coming close to the end. I have just a few more questions, but this has been a deep, intellectual, interesting conversation with you. I really enjoy it. Do you have anything you'd like to add or say on your end before I start getting to my last questions here?
Go ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, more simply, do you enjoy having this fetish? I mean, it sounds like you do, but would you say you do? And what do you feel about it in a more broad sense?
I totally enjoy it. Yeah. So I think, yeah, life would be so much poorer without it. To be honest, and it's yeah, something that I think I would always enjoy.
What do you have speculation on like? And I think you talked about it, but like speculation on what it is about the fart affinity for you, and what is it about farting in general that does it for you that maybe other things do not.
I think it's the shared intimacy. So like yeah, like doing it by myself. Yeah, that's kind of fun. It feels good. It's a release. All that sort of stuff. But in the end, it's something that I'd always like to share with someone else. And it's that sort of base bodily function. It's getting back to animal, you know, origins, and it's kind of a leveler in that respect. So like you can be cultured and cultivated and intellectual and all sorts of things, but hey, we all fart, and so it's actually exposing yourself um, to those base origins with someone else. I think it's great. It's deep. It's meaningful.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that explanation. I think it's a very concise way of saying. I think a way of summarizing everything you've said over this interview. Because I think
And like shall I say too, as opposed to another more extreme variation of this that we've talked about, it's not messy.
sure. Yeah, no, it's very true. It is very true. We have
Not that
talked
there's
about that.
anything wrong with that. I'm very cool about that too. But I think, yeah, look, yeah, it's. I've seen somewhere written it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on. You know,
It's
I mean,
true.
without clothes, it's kind of fun without clothes too. But yeah, like you don't need to, prepare the setting for it. You can do it anywhere, anytime. So yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. It could definitely be much more conducive to staying in one situation and maintaining that mental headspace rather than having to move to a tub to do like golden shower
Mm-hmm.
or do something
Yeah,
else. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
absolutely, absolutely. What do you think? What do you have thoughts for the future of the fetish? Whether it just be for yourself, for the community, for farting in general. What do you think about it?
Mhm. So I think, thanks to your podcast and probably a whole lot of other stuff too, it'll become more, out of the shadows a little bit, and so there'll be more of a community that forms around it, and even in less populated areas such as the one that I live in, there's a high chance we'll meet more like-minded people that are able to articulate that aspect of their sexuality. So that's a great thing. In terms of myself, yeah, it's interesting. One of the people that was fairly prominent in those early groups, I remember I DM'd him at one stage and I said, oh, I haven't seen you much online or any of the content you used to put up. And he sort of said, oh, no one wants to see an old man farting, and when I think about it, he wasn't that old really, but, like he was probably in his 40s or something. And I thought, oh, like, no. There's lots of people that would like to see an old man farting, So yeah, I'm going to go boldly forth, I think, and, be one of those old men. So yeah, that's my plan. And I'm sure I'll find other old men that are part of the community as well going forward. And the only thing that would stop me, and I don't want to sound awful about this, but would be having a colostomy or something, you know.
Sure.
But while I've still got an anus and rectum, you know, like, yeah, I'll be up for it.
I love that. I love that.
That's my future.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I really enjoy that, and especially it is such a boisterous community among people who share videos and what have you. The gay side of this the fetish in general, this fetish in general has been illuminating in how great of a community sense I think it seems to have from at least from my perspective on the outside. And listening to people on the podcast as well, I think that's great, and that you feel compelled to maybe be a part of that in a way, and that's really cool. That's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I used to. In fact, in the early days, I did actually put up content myself. That was freely available, and didn't think too much of it. And I probably met some nice people that way. And then, I was obviously very naive at the time. And then, I got these sort of like messages from strangers and things. And, it was sort of breaching privacy a little bit. And I thought, I shouldn't have probably done that, So I kind of eased back. And like I said, it was... it's more of a private thing now between just, direct messaging people. So yeah. I'm still, very happy to sort of like, share videos and things, but not so much on an open forum anymore.
For sure. Makes sense.
I do appreciate the people who do, because I think that's great.
Absolutely. Well, now there's now basically it's a whole commerce around it as well. I think there exists people that do it for the passion as well. I think we've talked to some on the show, but I think that, as kind of the heterosexual side of being fully commodified, I think it, people, it goes back to, people being in society, of needing to figure out ways that they can continue to exist, and some doing that maybe more ethically than others, or more reasonably than others, and some exploitively, as any situation of commodification seems to go.
Yeah, that's right. And I think in the end, the more we talk about it, the less, well, I would hope that the less that becomes a thing, and that we can all just get out there and really do it ourselves in real time, face to face, person to person.
I love that. No, I love that idea. I agree. I think that's definitely part of the reason why this show hopes to, like, let's have people like be able to openly talk about this. I mean, that's my hope. It's not going to be everyone. I don't know how quickly the wave will come, but I do think it can happen, and I think people can surprise us in terms of how open they can be, as long as they're the right people that actually do care for us, do have that intimacy, as it were, that emotional intimacy with us.
Yeah.
Rick, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and spending this time with me. It's been illuminating. It's been wonderful to hear about your experience in the farting space, as it were, and I really appreciate it. I hope you'll maybe come back on again, and we could talk some more.
It's been a great pleasure. Thanks, Raj.